Welcome to The Chat. This is a podcast from the team at Glasgow City Mission, the first and the granddaddy of the global city mission movement. I'm Charles Maasz, proud to be CEO at this time. This series is intended as a resource and a point of connection for anybody interested in the work that goes on at Glasgow City Mission. I want to speak to people whose passion, vocation, career, faith journey or life aligns with an aspect of the work and the rhythm of what we do. Many will have a faith perspective, some will not. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Please check out our website, our social media platforms. Click like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and add us to your favorites. Feedback is welcome, but please keep it clean, keep it civil. Thank you. So, Kate, lovely to see you. This is Kate Mitchell, and this is The Chat. So we want to speak to people whose careers and vocations, interests, hobbies, passions, whatever, align with work that either the Glasgow City Mission does or the sorts of issues that impact people who would come and use Glasgow City Mission, or in fact, things that might impact volunteers, staff and things. And this today, I think, is a topic that has impact probably on everybody. It's a cultural thing. And well, I should let Kate really describe firstly who you work for, how it is we came to meet one another, and your organization. Is it an organization? Is that fair to say? Love Matters.
Yeah, we're a charity.
Okay, good. Right, yeah. So tell us all about it, Kate.
So I'm Kate. I have been in Glasgow since 2004, actually. So quite a long time now. I'm obviously not from here. So I'm from Manchester, and I came here for uni and have stayed in this great, wonderful city. And I've got two young children who are little Glaswegians. So my daughter's 6 and my little boy's 2. And I have been working for Bethany Christian Trust for just gone 7 years, actually, so quite a long time. And I sort of came on board with Bethany with a sort of employability hat. So my background has been sort of welfare to work and supporting people into employment. And I joined Bethany to try and offer that support, particularly in the West within Scotland. I've done quite a bit of work with St George's Tron Church of Scotland, and they opened their cafe in 2015. So that's when I first came back after my first bit of maternity leave, and supported sort of work placements and guys who were wanting to move into employment, and had probably had quite a big gap in their sort of employment history. And so I do a whole host of different things trying to support people towards moving closer to a job. And I had the pleasure of meeting Charlie when he was working in the kitchen there, and we had lots of good chats about bikes and things of the world. And and then my heart really has always been young people and teenagers. And I think probably when I first joined Bethany, I kind of thought that I would be doing a lot more stuff in that sort of realm. And at the time I was sort of doing various bits of youth work, and I trained as an educator to go into schools to talk about sex and relationships. And my sort of I had a sort of a realization at that point that really was my heart's cry, really, is talking to young people about those issues and about those things. And so over a long period of time, me and my friend Karen set up Love Matters, which is a charity that are about supporting young people in sex and relationships and helping them to work out what a healthy relationship looks like. So there you go.
Wow. So you feel called and drawn to the area that most parents just completely want to avoid. And
yes.
Pretend it doesn't exist, and hope that someone like Kate and a friend will turn up at the school and do all the dirty business for them and explain all of the intricacies.
Yeah, I'm like, I love all of that stuff. I love talking to teenagers about sex.
What the classic is having a teacher say at school back in my day, perhaps, who might have been a nun or something, and they come and tell you, and of course they then get brutally assailed, but they've heard it all before, and they've seen each generation of children come and go.
Mm.
What was it then that really put the light on, do you think, for you when communicating some of these things with young people?
What, in terms of me recognizing that's my passion?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty niche topic, and it's a pretty sensitive, but it's a very sensitive topic for a lot of people, parents as well. It's rife with all sorts of pitfalls and problems. And as a is it a Christian? Is it a self-consciously Christian? Is it upfront Christian organization, the charity that you're running, or is it a secular one? Or how is it framed?
So our love for Jesus is at the core of everything that we do. And we are totally open about that. When we go into schools, the material we would use in schools is shaped by our Christian values, but it's not evangelistic within a school setting. And we recognize, that whole where Paul talks about, we've got to meet our audience where they're at, and we're not going into schools necessarily to share the gospel. We would love that opportunity, but our heart really is about trying to support and educate young people and give them the sort of tools and information. But our heart also is really to meet with young believers and young Christians, and share the good news of the gospel for sex and relationships, and to encourage them and support them, and recognize that it's really tough. But going back to what you were saying, I think I didn't become a believer till I was in my early 20s. And I came to university at 21. So I'd worked for a bit, and I went backpacking in Australia for a year. And I came to university to do history and politics. And I got sort of halfway through my degree. And it wasn't the wrong degree, because I really enjoyed studying it. But it wasn't really what I was passionate about. And I think I sort of, in that journey when you first come to faith and you're working out who Jesus is and who you are in amongst all of that, and I guess also trying to understand your own journey in the light of a savior and a king, and understanding I guess your past, and trying to work all of that out, and going, okay, Jesus was there in amongst all of that, and how do I work that all out? So I think I think after a couple of years of being a believer, I sort of started to realize who I was and what I was passionate. And I think a big thing for me, my teenage years were quite difficult for a lot of different reasons. And I think a big thing for me was that if I'd had somebody say to me who Jesus was when I was 14, 15, whatever, things might have looked quite different. And so, ultimately, that's what I want to be for young people now. I want to be able to say, he is light and he is truth, and he can transform anything. And I guess in terms of sort of sex and relationships, so I sort of had realised that I wanted to work with young people. And so I did various different bits of youth work. I did some youth work with my church and stuff with Scripture Union. And after I graduated, I did a year team with Scripture Union, actually, and did a year out with them. And I kind of thought, I'd quite like to go into youth work. And I was like, well, I've got a history and politics degree, which is not massively relevant, but some people would argue it's not. But anyway, and so I was sort of trying to work out what I wanted to get into. And at that point, one of the youth workers I was working with had trained with a project called Evaluate, which was a program put together by CARE, so Christian Action, Research and Education. So it was a sex and relationships program that they had put together to deliver within schools. And was all about trying to open up questions for young people, and recognize that relationships look, very colourful and different, but that we would like to encourage young people to protect sex for marriage, and that marriage is a good thing. And so I did that within a school setting for a number of years. And I think during that time, I just loved it. I loved going in schools and talking to young people and having these really interesting conversations. And I think also helping young people navigate that side of things that's so complicated when you're a teenager. You know, it's complicated when you're an adult, but you know, there's a lot going on for you when you're a teenager. And I just absolutely loved it. And I sort of realized at that point, that's all I really want to do.
So what does the so you might as well just jump straight in because you sort of brought it in. What does yes, you did. What does the 14, 15, 16-year-old Kate need to hear from, I won't ask your age, but you know, mother Kate, married mum, seen a few things, lived a bit longer, Kate. You want to be that person that you needed when you didn't have that person, I'm assuming. And so what are the things that the young Kate is asking the older Kate to say to the younger person when you meet them? Or what are the sorts of things?
That's a good question. I think it's sort of 13, 14, 15. I think the key thing for me that I desperately needed to hear was that I was allowed to exist and that I was valuable. And for various different reasons, I didn't get that as a teenager. And, you know, I ended up not treating myself very well for a very long time. And, you know, even stuff that I still battle with now at nearly 40, I think, you know, that's what I needed to hear, is that I was here on purpose, with a purpose. That there were things, that my life was of importance and value, and that the things that I wanted to say, or that I did say, were worth hearing, I guess.
Yeah. So how is there an issue then, do you think? So we want to communicate with young people about the value, not just of relationships then, but of their essential and intrinsic value, of people made in the image of God, as somebody precious, somebody of value, somebody worthy of dignity and of being dignified by others as much as by themselves. So that's there's a huge amount of self-esteem, I guess, issues with this, but there's also a question of where young people look to find value, look to find self-worth from what is the credibility of your peer group. Is it because everyone else is doing X, Y, and Z on Instagram, or Snapchat, or whatever it is? Are these the sorts of things that you can even hope to begin to address, or do they come up?
In terms of what? In terms of the work that we're doing within schools?
Yeah,
I think, to a degree, definitely. I think sort of, trying to unpack that a bit. Like, I think one thing that does strike me now that's very different is this whole sort of social media side of things. And I think a big thing that makes sort of, for young people, their experience different is that, you know, when we were younger, you know, if we were battling with something or struggling with something, we would go to the people that we trust or people around us and sort of wrestle it out a bit and try and work out where we're at on something. But then ultimately we would have to come down to make a decision about where we stood on something. But with this whole world of social media and the internet and whatnot, you know, when young people are battling or struggling with something right now, the first port of call isn't necessarily people that they trust or people that they value in terms of their opinions and ideas. It's let's go on the internet and see what the internet is saying about who I am or what I'm struggling with. And now young people's maybe ideas about themselves and their identity is shaped by sort of a whole culture or community online of people that they've not necessarily ever met, and people can find this whole community and vocabulary sometimes that validates where they're at or what they're struggling with. And I think that is very different, because it then opens you up to maybe concepts or ideas or sort of thoughts about yourself that wouldn't have appeared at all when I was a teenager. So from about the age of 12, I started to struggle with an eating disorder very seriously. And by the time I was blown anorexic, really, really ill, nearly killed me. And I dread to think what I would have pursued at that point in the state I was in, because of what I could have looked at online and what, I was a mess without any of that stuff. And I really fear for particularly young women. As a woman myself, I really fear for young women, for the content that they can access so easily, and what can be spoken over them, and the images that they can see, and that all goes in and that all shapes us. And so that has an impact in terms of my desire to work in schools and work with young people and talk particularly to young women about the challenges that they're facing and the stuff that they're trying to work out.
So of course, so this is an incredibly intimate thing to discuss. Sadly, my internet connection is now being told is unstable. Just at that time. But so in terms of the topics that you would raise with Love Matters, and your personal experiences of eating disorders, self-image, sense of value and worth, I'm guessing, and having worked through all that, do you find those two things linked then? Are they often linked, do you think?
Yeah. I think massively. And I think a lot about, in terms of how we view ourselves, of course it's going to shape the relationships that we take part in, from friendships to intimate relationships and sexual relationships. How we view ourselves impacts on how we allow others to treat us and behave towards us, and what we deem as acceptable behavior. And if we don't value ourselves, then we won't value the decisions that we make about ourselves either. And so inevitably we will take part in relationships that aren't going to do us any good if we don't think that we are of any worth or value to start with. And I think particularly, for those of us who, we all struggle with our identity, we all struggle with our worth and value, and some of us to greater degrees than others. But in terms of the relationships that we form with each other, if you don't hold yourself in high regard, then you're going to take more risk-taking behavior, because you're constantly looking for that affirmation and that validation in relationships to go, well, I don't think I'm worth anything, but maybe this person does. And so if I spend enough time with them, they're going to raise me up, or they're going to help me feel complete or whole. And actually, if we don't think that beforehand, we certainly aren't going to think that afterwards or whilst we're in that relationship. And so I guess there's got to be part of my my own heart for wanting to do this work and look at sort of the whole picture of relationships, has got to sort of tap into identity and value, and I guess those sort of two things being connected with one another.
So firstly, there's a value attached to the actions, right? So let's say we say your actions are negative to you, and they're negative to the people that you're engaging them with, because there's a lack of mutuality, there's a lack of value, and there's some degree of harm in the that you're using people, or you're allowing them to use you, etc., right? So there's a devaluing of the human, which we would agree is negative. But purely from a young person's perspective, I'm just having a good time, everyone's doing the same things, who are you to judge? And so we would say, well, to get them to the place where they understand that what they're doing may have harm attached to themselves. Perhaps they don't see it now, but they may in future.
Yeah.
We then have to stand in the place where we say, you don't know it right now, so it could potentially become a bit patronizing, right? You don't know the harm you're doing to yourself, and you're not yet ready to, or have the level of maturity to really comprehend why this is negative for you, and for others, and for society, perhaps. But trust me, I'm telling you. Right.
That's totally
I can hear, and you can see, and how that goes down.
But I guess there's got to be an element of that for young people in every sphere of their lives, because they recognize that they need to learn, and that they learn from their peers, but they're learning from adults, whether that's within a school setting or at home, or they're constantly learning, and they're constantly probably reminded that they've got to learn, that you don't know enough yet, you haven't experienced enough of life. And I think that's probably that's a good point for me to remember in all the work that I do, that you don't want to be patronizing, because the fact is, lots of time young people know a lot more than I do.
Right, and they'll be keen to tell you that as well. It's like, you don't know what it's like to be us. You don't know what it's like.
And ultimately, I think one of the key things, for a key value for me in the work that I do within Bethany, and in any sort of sphere, is that I don't want to be a person that says, I understand, because whatever you say, you don't, unless you've walked that path, unless you are in that situation, you don't understand. And we can be compassionate, and we can say, I hear you, and I want to validate what you are saying and say that it is important. But unless you've walked that path, you can't sit there and say, oh, I understand. And I think you've raised something really important, that we don't want to patronize our young people, because a lot of time they get it far more than we do. But I guess we want to give them tools sometimes, don't we? And equip them to make their own decisions, and trust them to be able to do that.
Because they're being raised in a global context with the global platforms constantly calling at them from their handsets, and therefore they create. So previously we might have had regional or cultural contexts, frameworks within which to develop our understanding of what is a right and a wrong relationship, right? So it could have been that you went to a Catholic school, it could have been that you had puritanical parents, or it could have been that you had hippie parents who were into free love, but whatever, you had a fairly defined and accessible network of people who would stimulate your understanding and response to the world around you. Right now, your parents say your parents fine, they talk nonsense and they shout at the telly and they think Gogglebox is funny, but actually this platform in my hand on my phone is the one that is my school and my peer group and my influencer circle, and that is the range of information that I'm going to decide normalizes things for me.
And that's what makes it so powerful.
It's powerful, right? So it's powerful. Either they are reshaping, because we let's say British people, right, traditionally, famously abroad, known to be a bit, we don't really get naked like the Scandinavians, do you know what I mean? And we've got that kind of approach to things that I think it's a parody, it's a stereotype, but let's just roll with that for now. And so that with that comes a slightly uptight perspective on what normal or healthy physical and personal relationships should look like. And then a child who's trying to be rebellious will push back against that and go completely the opposite way. So these platforms, though, whilst they may be often outrageous, they may also just be normalizing something that's frankly quite normal. Do you know what I mean? And that perhaps it's our lenses that are skewed, and actually they've got access to a much more, like if something's very available, like you said, the young girls have got access to images on their phone at instant access with no barriers, and it's alarming, right? But at the same time, if what is freely available to you, and then you're also at liberty to pick it up or not pick it up. like is much less curious because it's constant.
Yeah. And I guess ultimately it's getting that balance, because I don't want to censor things, particularly for my children. I want my children to be able to read any sort of material and be able to talk to me about it, because that's the world we're in, and that's education. That doesn't mean to say that I don't want to protect them or shape things for them to a degree, because I'm their parent and I want to make sure that they're safe, and I feel that that's a job that I've been called to. Like my little girl, she's just starting to be able to read, and there's stuff that she can now read when we're out and about that she's not been able to read before, and I'm like, that is so powerful, because I can't withhold that from her anymore. I can't keep her safe from that or protect her from that. But then also, that's hugely exciting and exhilarating for my little girl, that she's like, oh, what does that word say? And you're like, no, you know now, don't you? And so I guess we've got to be careful as well that we don't go the other way, where we've got this sort of culture emerging now where we want to clamp down on anything within society that we find offensive, and we are sort of almost losing a sort of debating culture in areas because something's considered offensive, whereas actually there's huge value in debate and in learning from one another and having different views and being able to communicate that in ways that are respectful. And we've got to make sure that we don't go to that other degree where we go, well, actually we're going to be the sort of thought police and say what is acceptable to read or think or see and what's not. But then I guess we also want to keep that balance of, we still want to protect young people's hearts and minds, and there's got to be boundaries there, do you know? That's the whole, for me, with the Lord, that he's all about boundaries, and unfortunately there's too many people within society, and probably even within church, that don't see those boundaries as protection but as rules. They're always communicated as rules, whereas actually God's about freedom, but freedom within safety, isn't it? We've got to, it's a difficult one.
It is. Well, the whole topic is, and we're gonna, and of course when we talk with one question bleeds into something else, and that's just the way it goes, but that's okay. It's a sort of what do they call that, a flow of consciousness type thing. So that and that's fine. It's challenging with young uns though, because as a person, so I went through a lot of stuff and did a lot of things, and I came to a place where I realized that those things were being destructive to me. And I felt it palpably.
Yeah.
Then I saw it, and then before I had committed myself to any form of faith or religion that could be named, I could sense there was a spiritual element to it, and I recognized it, started to look for it, saw it, found it to be powerful, and then tested it, which would be seen to be foolish if you were being mentored or discipled. But I was not being discipled. I was just a heart crying out, for something. And it's when you start to not see you start to see your value of your own self. That's good. And then understanding other people to be of value as well, and their true value. I mean, as people, like I mentioned earlier, made in the image of God. Somebody's son, somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, not commodities.
Yeah.
And that starts to impact the way in which you view the disposability of relationship. I think that's one of an undermining thing.
Yeah.
Is a sense of the disposability and the casualness of things that are sacred, whether or not you believe in God.
Yeah.
They could still be put in the realm of the sacred, because of an intimacy truly explored becomes a sacred space. But in order to get to that place of exploring, I guess, a sense of mutuality, deep mutuality, of that reciprocity of giving and taking and moving away from around for one another. I always start going on about the Trinity now, so I'll just not do that. But inevitably ends up there. That's a profound place to get people to, or to try and steer people toward. That could equip perhaps people, do you think, if they were able to think in these terms, think of themselves and others in these terms of mutual worth, mutual value. There's no more then, it's not about hierarchy of value, it's about a mutuality of value.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's huge.
Then you're equipping perhaps and tooling people up to engage better, not with themselves, and then engage with others on a platform and on a level which gives them a better chance of prospering in those relationships.
Yeah, definitely.
Don't agree too much, because we've got to have a dialogue.
But that is what is hugely powerful for me, for the gospel, is that, and about sex and relationships, is that Jesus, it was always about preferring the needs of others before himself, and if we can do that as his believers, that's how we flourish, and that's how our relationships flourish. And if we could help, if we can help communicate that to other people, that the gospel's not saying, actually, we want to try and change some of the ways you think about relationship. No, we actually want you to live in a completely different way, and to have a completely different approach to what a relationship looks like, because every person is hugely valuable, and that should shape how we have our being within community.
There's two things that we've not talked about properly yet. One is, that was interesting to me, because firstly I had a wrong perception of what your charity was about to begin with, because I was under the understanding that it was trying to address, or sought to address, the harms that are brought to young people through pornography specifically.
That is one of the things we're about.
It's one of the things, but then more nuanced than that is the sexualization of young people. And speaking into that. So, and I've just got them slightly broken down into two, albeit they are very, they flow into one another. But the sexualization of young people, how does that appear to you to have been an issue so great that you would feel led to start a charity like this?
I think because sex is everywhere, and I guess it's within everything in terms of media, and also the whole porn industry, and the values that porn is communicating has just proliferated into sort of all areas of society now. And so we've sort of normalized things that would, even 5 years ago be shocking, but now it's sort of all filtered in and these things sort of seep into culture and take root, and all of a sudden we're okay with it. I was cycling to work a few weeks ago, and I was just coming into the city centre, and there was an advert for visiting a castle, so days out to a castle. And what did it have on the advert? It had this woman who was naked, sat down. I couldn't see her entire body, but I knew she didn't have any clothes on, advertising visiting a castle. I'm like, what the dickens has this woman got to do with going out on historical trips to a castle? Nothing. But advertisers know I'm going to look at that because I can't help it.
Yeah.
And the problem as well with print media is that I can't turn that off. So I can remember a few years ago there was an advert for a shop selling women's lingerie, and the image that they had used for the women's lingerie, in my opinion, was very explicit, and was sort of connected to BDSM and sort of the bondage side of things. And this advert was just down the road from school. And I'm like, do you know how many young people are going to walk past that image of a woman and go, that's what a woman can look like and that's acceptable?
Mm-hmm.
How many children, you know, my daughter could see that and I can't turn that off for her.
Yeah.
That isn't okay. And I think the sort of the growth of the porn industry and the accessibility of porn within society, it's such damage for our young people, because we've got all these young people who've maybe not even had their first kiss, but I've seen hugely explicit stuff online.
Tell me how you've made the link between the advertising hoarding,
Yeah.
in the completely in the public realm,
Yeah.
and the porn industry. What do you sense is the bridge, is the link, is the normalizing thing there?
I think we were sort of talking earlier about sort of the objectification of people, and that is at its heart is pornography, isn't it? You know, it's not about intimacy, it's not about relationship, it's about objectifying and treating people like products. And I guess in terms of the print media, that heart is sort of seeped in, hasn't it, where imagery that we wouldn't say is acceptable previously is now, well, it's okay, isn't it, because we might have it on some adverts on telly, and if it all just creeps in, doesn't it?
Can I put it like this and see if this is I need to put it like this because for my own sake of understanding, but I'm cautious because I don't want to come across like some sort of Victorian misogynist. Anyway, let's see how it goes.
Charlie is not a Victorian misogynist.
Yay! I'm going to get you to write that on my first book, on the back of the cover.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Go on.
So let's just take a style presentation, like over made up, like the fake lips, the fillers, the contouring.
Yeah.
The way that
fake everything.
Ultra fake.
Yeah.
Is, well, it would have been ridiculed to try self-consciously to look like a porn star in that hyper color max ultra HD kind of ridiculousness, massive lashes and all that, has become the mainstream look, but unself-consciously not realizing necessarily that is borrowed from the parody of the porn star look.
I think a big thing as well has got to be the sort of the growth of reality TV and the sort of fame for 5 minutes, and this desire within culture now to be famous and to be a celebrity. For what? Do you know, like, what are you famous for? Your profession, for your academic attributes, for your sports proud? People just want to be famous for the sake of being famous, and ultimately people recognize there's power in shock value. And the problem is that as the porn industry has grown, the fact is, with smartphones and the advent of smartphones, people have this entire world right next to them all the time, and so everything becomes accessible 24 hours a day. And so if I want to look at women or men or people doing stuff, I can do that whenever I want in the privacy of my own home.
They're going to, sorry to interrupt you, they're going to say though often to me, I don't dress for other people's gaze. I dress for myself. Well, they're going to say that, more often than not.
But that is still saying I am valued solely on what I look like. I am still a product, and I am still validated by how I look beyond anything else about me. Like, how on earth is that liberalized? You know, how is that liberated or empowered in any capacity?
It's not, but your look,
powerful.
but your look enters the room and is disseminated across a room.
Yeah.
Your look is long before the gravity and weight of your intellect can be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, and if you were a young person, if you were told when you were young, you're stupid, don't talk rubbish, you weren't made, you were made pretty, not clever, or whatever, and then you grow up, and a seed of that is in, okay, well, where the value I bring to the world is that actually I'm strong, or actually I'm physically attractive, or I'm funny, or I'm clever. But you work to what you perceive your strengths to be, don't you?
Yeah. And it's powerful. Sex is powerful, and things are going to be easier if you're more attractive. Unfortunately, that's what culture says, because we are sexual beings, and because we are tempted and enticed by that. And so I guess at the core of it, it shouldn't really be any surprise to us that sex sells, and that sex is everywhere, and that people want it. Because also in those moments of sexual gratification, you're not alone for that moment, are you? However you're experiencing that. And so,
what do you mean by that? Where's the bond?
Well, I guess in terms of people experiencing pleasure, it's a distraction, isn't it? And it takes your eyes off the circumstances that you're in, or the reality that you're in. And so,
even in the billboard moment,
when people look at it,
yeah,
are people experiencing pleasure? Well, some people will, you know, and that's why it's there, and that's why the advertisers know that it works.
It must work, because I mean, the amount of traffic that's on the web, and I don't know the stats, but a massive proportion of it, and a massive proportion of the traffic on the web, is all around this.
Yeah.
So it's clearly the most potent force on the planet, probably.
Yeah. Every second, 28,000 people are watching porn.
In the UK?
Like globally.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I believe it. I wouldn't be surprised if it was much more than that.
I mean, it's great. I mean, the one website they did sort of an assessment of how much content they had, and it was enough videos for 5 videos for every person on the planet. Porn enables us to not feel alone for those moments, doesn't it? That we are part of this world of the people on screen, and we love a distraction, don't we? You know, we love being distracted from our reality, and we love escaping. And porn is just another way to do that, I guess.
Right. Like, you mean in the sense that it's a kind of dopamine sort of release thing? It can be addictive.
Yeah, all those things. Yeah.
Starts to consume you. You're not the consumer anymore. It demands of you. You don't demand of it.
Yeah, and for some people, porn is definitely an addiction.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it's not, my concern isn't just for the community that are struggling with addiction, and the fact that we now have men in their 20s struggling with erectile dysfunction because they're so hardwired for pornography. My concern is why have we got to the point where we are so okay to watch other people having sex? Like, that sort of voyeur concept has just proliferated through society.
Could that be a deep normal? Could that be a prehistory normal? Could that be why it triggers?
You know, some types of pornography have always existed, you know, going back through the centuries, but the sort of mass production of pornography and the easy accessibility of pornography, those two things mean that people can view stuff that they would never have had access to previously.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I have concerns for young people, not just in terms of, they've seen all this content before they've actually done anything that would, would be considered normal in terms of sort of adolescent relationships and behaviors and growth, where when you're a teenager and you're working out, do you fancy someone, and how do I approach a girl or a boy, or those sort of people are going to lose those sorts of just normal courtship skills, because you can do everything you like with this without actually experiencing it in a physical, intimate, genuine relationship.
100%. I see that with I see that with the children. Now, I'm not suggesting this topic particularly,
no,
but the fact of the matter is there are people that we'll walk through, let's say, Braehead Shopping Centre, and we'll go, isn't that lad you play football with? And and my boy will go, this is a couple of years ago. You go, yeah. I go, and you're going to say anything? You went, no, it looks stupid. Be like, but they'd already done the connection on their devices. Did you lose me for a second there?
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. No, it went glitchy. The fact is that they would have done it. They did the communication, like on some fashion, but without doing eye-to-eye contact, without engaging in face-to-face interaction, which would feel awkward and weird. And you've got to look at each other in the eyes, and there's too much intimacy involved in it. And it's sort of paralyzing in a way. And I do wonder, because whilst my lad and my daughter are very sociable and able to hold conversation with people, I think there'll be a lot of people who lack, say, self-assurance, confidence, self-presentation skills, who will just at all costs avoid the potential ridicule of getting a real life interaction wrong.
Yeah.
And then recourse to the screen instead, which is deeply troubling.
I think we have to be careful, though, that that for young people these days, they've always grown up with mobile phones. They've always existed, and the sort of social media side of things, they don't have their life and their digital life, that's one. They're just part of it. And I guess we also have to be careful that as older, more experienced people, that just because the ways that maybe you and I would feel are the best ways to connect with others is sort of face to face and in person, that we don't place that on our young people and say, well, we know best. And because there is, as much as I don't use any social media, I have never been on Instagram. I don't know anything about it. Just, revealing I run this charity talking to young people, and I'm totally out of touch, but actually I don't use all of that for lots of different reasons. But there's lots of good that comes from social media, and there's lots of spaces where young, people who maybe don't feel they're able to connect or relate are able to find space and solace and welcome on those platforms. And that's good. And are sort of being able to encourage and share and stay in contact with people, that's all good. One of my good friends moved to Australia a couple of years ago, and I know how she's getting on, and she sends me pictures of her kids, and I know what the fact that lockdown doesn't look quite the same out there for them, and she's off to the zoo, and I'm like, great, I'm really pleased for you while I'm stuck in my house. But that's incredible, and that's such a gift. And so I guess we have to be careful that we don't just go, it's all bad and all the things that young people are doing with phones and social media are wrong.
Because they're pioneers. They're working out how we do this from going forward.
Yes.
They're working out the new forms of language. Don't put a full stop at the end of a message. You know, don't leave it open like this, do this. And there's a whole new etiquette.
Yeah.
Don't just give me a thumbs up because it's too, like, cut me down. All sorts of things I'm hearing.
I give people thumbs up all
I
the
know, I
time.
do too. And it's like, but they forgive you because you're not a part of that generation. But then
Yeah.
if they did it to one another, it would be seen as a diss
It's
and stuff.
frowned upon.
I agree. We going back to what we said earlier, which is to the imposition of our own value system on a group of people who are actually working a whole lot of stuff out that's never been worked out before, and actually needs to be worked out. And it's and it's better that they do the working out, frankly, because who are we to tell them? So just going back to the billboard then, and the sexualization of young people, and how that bleeds into pornographic imagery and the harm it can do. Is it problematic because a person walking down the road who doesn't conform to the sort of imagery that is being presented feels undervalued, devalued, or bullied even by it, by the very presentation of this example of whatever is perceived to be perfection, is diminishing to the person looking who doesn't feel that they fit that, or to the girl who does identify with that figure, makes them think that that's what they should be doing because that's where they'll find value and worth. These are the toxic ways in which
it's both.
Is it? Yeah.
And I also think it's also damaging in terms of expectation for young people to go, well, I should expect my partner to dress or behave or act in those sorts of ways because society and media is telling me that that is an acceptable way to carry yourself and dress and behave and interact. And so it's damage, I guess, on all those levels. You know, it's that whole, you know, images are doctored and changed and photoshopped, and the person becomes unrecognizable from, you know, there's the video that Dove did a few years ago where they take a picture of the model and then you see the process that the image goes through, and the woman at the end looks very different from the woman at the beginning, and it's like, well, who said what's wrong with this initial woman? What is wrong with this beautiful late, you know, why do we need to change her, and why do we need to create something that isn't real? And we've got all these young women going, I need to be something that doesn't exist. Because as I said earlier, you know, I had enough trouble with my eating and my perception myself and whatnot without social media and that whole side of things. You know, it is no surprise to me that self-harming has increased because we now have all these young people trying to be something that doesn't even exist. How is that not going to cause harm?
And of course and not to just sort of lump men in with this just for the sake of being seen to be even-handed, but you know, I see a lot of emphasis from young boys very early, 15, 16 years old, who feel like they do have to look like the guy on I don't know what the program is called, Love Island or some such thing. You know, they've got to have a very particular, very manufactured look to themselves, and are racked with insecurities around why they're not, wishing they were something they were not. Curly hair, they wish they had straight. If they got straight, they wish it was curly. If they tall, they wish they were stocky, and if they're stocky, they wish they were tall. And the poor people, but that's always been the case, right? But it's just got to be more acute now, surely.
Surely. I mean, talking about sexualization within society, the fact that a couple of years ago there were more complaints to Love Island about them smoking on screen than people having sex on screen says to me where we're at as a society, that we're more shocked that people are smoking than people having sex on live television. How are we okay with that? Oh, I despair. But there we go.
It's very challenging. So to speak into that arena is to stand, is to face potentially the accusations of all that come with it, prudishness and
Hmm.
old-fashioned and all the rest of it. Do you ever get any of that when you've addressed young folks?
No.
No, you must be doing it
No.
in a way that they're happy
But
with.
I think one thing for me is there are definitely those values, and there must be people that think that about me and about the work that we do and whatnot. But I think our work is very relevant. Our work is very accessible. So we use a lot of the materials from. So there's a charity down in Manchester called the Naked Truth Project, and so we use a lot of their materials within schools, and their materials are very accessible and slick and are genuine and real. And I'm not shocked by any of the content and the stuff that we talk about. It wouldn't be everybody's cup of tea. And but on the other hand, I've had teachers within schools think that we might make kids curious about pornography, and I'm like,
Right.
if you think we're going to make young people curious, what
You
do
got
you
no
think?
clue.
No,
Yeah.
you're like, one of the presentations we took into a school all about the sort of lies within pornography, so to do with women's bodies and men's bodies and sexual acts that they perform, and all those sorts of things that lots of people wouldn't necessarily like to talk about. And what one of the teachers was like, well, we were a bit worried that this might be a bit too offensive or shocking or sensitive, and you're like, well, we're just being genuine about what the content is. And so there's probably lots of people that think that I'm far too outspoken and graphic and rude and all these sort of things, and I'm like, well, I'm just trying to be real. But I guess on the other hand, in terms of my values, people would probably think there'll be lots of people in society that would think that we are too conservative with a small c and traditional and outdated. But I think the gospel is as relevant now as it has ever been, and people are always hungry for truth. And for me, the gospel is that it's the good news and it is truth.
And in the context of what you do, in the context of this work, how is the gospel truth? What is the liberating message to the person who is, unbeknownst to themselves, held in captivity and bondage by the expectations and the influences coming from outside constantly, barrage?
I guess the gospel for me is truth in terms of how we value ourselves. First and foremost is that you are made in the image of God and you were bought at great price, that Jesus went to the cross for you and you are valuable. And if we can hold that about ourselves, then we're able to see that actually the way God's calling us to live as believers is about protecting our hearts and protecting our minds. And I think one thing that makes me sad sometimes is that I feel there aren't enough people within the church that are confident that the gospel is good news for sex and relationships, that actually keeping sex within marriage is about protection. And that I was listening to something a week ago, and the Glenn Scrivener, who's Anglican, I think he's an Anglican minister, and he was saying sex is a proclamation of our marriage vows. And I was like, yes, that is it. Sex is this wonderful joy. This is, sex is holy fire, and it's wonderful and it's glorious, but we've got to keep it protected. And God says that's why we keep it within marriage, because if you awaken love too early, you're going to start stealing away from that precious relationship. The more we fritter sex about, the more we share it about with others, we detract from its value inherently. Sex is to be shared between a husband and wife within marriage, and sex is a gift from God, and it's about knowledge. It talks in the Bible about that sex is about being known and knowledge, and that sex is for pleasure and it is for comfort, and it protects us from temptation within marriage, but it's to be kept within marriage. that it's this sacred thing, part of that covenant relationship. And so as we take sex out of marriage, it's no surprise that there's a lot of damage that can be done, that we can be violated, that we can be left vulnerable and hurt. And, you know, there's the emotional consequences of that. And there's the physical consequences of that as well. You know, we open ourselves up to STIs and unplanned pregnancies, and, you know, we start to break down, you know, family relationships. And, you know, there's huge amounts of consequences when we take sex out of where it should be. And so for me, yeah, the gospel is all about freedom, but it's about being within safe boundaries to do that.
Yeah, there is a view from some outside the churches looking in, especially when it comes to dealing with young people, that you're just terrified that you know everyone's terrified of their young people going off to university because they're just going to run amok, because they're going to do the stuff that you've been telling them not to do, because of course you tell them not to do stuff, they're going to want to do the stuff. And then you and I shared a bit of a joke in a previous call, and my scenario is that when the youth get together in any kind of event, let's say it's down in Shepton Mallet outside Bristol or something for some big event, all of the young Christians of age are busy about looking, is that the boy for me? Is that the one the Lord has for me? Is that the girl the Lord has for me? And really it's all about, really, when you boil it all down, is that they want to get their jiggle on, don't they? And and if you can put it in some sort of spiritual gloss on it, all the better. But frankly, but then what can happen is, you know, they're very hungry to find the one the Lord has for them, get married young, have their children, wake up at 35 and feel very unfulfilled and think, this has just been a dry old dirge for ages. You know, I'm not saying this is I'm not saying that's how it is, but, you know, there must be plenty of people.
Yeah, I think there is so much within the church about getting married and being a married couple. And, you know, first and foremost, you know, I am married, and so I feel utterly unqualified to speak on behalf of single people. But what I know from friends of mine who are single is that they can feel very excluded from the church community because they're not in a married relationship and they don't have children and those sorts of things. And so I think, you know, when I first came to faith and I met people who were my age and who were married, this was like out of my mind. I was like, you're married? I was like, I only just worked out who I am.
Yeah, right.
And so, you know, that whole side of things is very different to the world. And so I think it's the value placed on it as well. And actually, you know, we're not all called to get married. You know, some of us are called to singleness. Some of us will find ourselves single in later life for various different reasons. And unfortunately, singleness is portrayed as you've been left behind, whereas actually singleness is a real gift. You know, it talks about that within the Bible. And it's painted so poorly within society and within the church. And that, you know, I think that has to change. That's got to change. And we need single people to have voices within the church community more, to talk about relationships more, because who understands things better than me in terms of saving themselves for the King and saying, I am absolutely committed to the gospel, whether God brings a person into my life to marry or not. Like, on you go, like, you know, I want to hear from you. And so I don't think we hear nearly enough from voices of single people enough, you know, and it's just put on this pedestal as up there above
the idealization of marriage and nuclear family.
But it is in lots of us have that desire. Lots of us want to get married and find a partner. And I think, you know, the fact is, if you are a believer and you're looking within a Christian circle, you know, it can't be all that you're after. It can't be your sole focus and purpose, because actually our sole purpose has to be the king, has to be seeking his kingdom first, and trusting that God knows you enough and knows you better than you know yourself and knows what you need in your life. And so we can pursue the king. We have to trust that he will bring into our path what is right for us, whether that's marriage or not. But I will also say to those Christian believers, go and search for another believer in a Christian circle, rather than looking out into the world and thinking, oh, well, I could just meet somebody and I'll share the gospel with them and they'll become a Christian. And you're like, yeah, do you know how many times I've known that to happen?
But all these pitfalls, all the pitfalls that we've mentioned for the secular young person moving into a dating stroke relationship intimacy context, there are pitfalls and dangers and problems there that I was just really throwing it in there, that for the idealized version of the Christian marriage that we might want to present, equally you might speak to a straw poll of monogamous Christian husband and wife sets, and actually dig a little deep, and after the Sunday service things are not good, things are not
and that I think sometimes people are rushing into marriage and just wanting to have sex, really, rather than actually saying, is this partner God has for me for the rest of my life? And it was interesting. I was watching something recently. This is totally not necessarily connected. I was watching a program all about Julia Donaldson, and all her books, and it's all about her life. And she's been married for a long time, 30, 40 years, very long time. And somebody had said to her, what makes a good marriage? And she says, marry the right person. And it's as simple as that. And I think, my husband is my absolute best friend, and that's who you need to marry. You need to marry your best friend. And you need to know that your sort of life trajectory, not just your values, but where you want to go, matches up. And you're going to be on the same path. Because if you're going into marriage and you are wanting different things, you're going to have to reconcile that before you get married. Because if you think it gets easier once you get married, you're wrong.
So there's a quality of discipleship there, element to that, in terms of your pre-marriage discipleship. Which again, I think probably takes some profound, because of course you talk about they were married before you'd even worked out who you were. Well, trust me, they hadn't yet worked out who they were either. But they were making a go of it, right? And they'd agreed to journey together in that adventure of working out who we are. And I guess
some of those people, that is right. And if you're going to get married at 19 or 21, maybe that's the right thing for you. It definitely wasn't the right thing for me. I needed to work out who I was for quite a long time before I met the right person. But it can't be all that we are focused on. That is.
But I think when young people's impulses are being suppressed and they're being told regularly that what everyone else is doing is not right, but it looks normal to the young person, and they're holding it down and holding it down and holding it down.
That's tough.
That's tough. And then someone says, this might be the wife the Lord has for you. Then let the floodgates open. Let's just
they're like, go. Let's do this.
This we're on. And it can lead to some problems down the road. And I think there is sometimes there's a lack of willingness to address the reality that people face. You know what I mean? It's like too scary. It's too scary a place for people who have got a protective mindset to protect people. We want to hide them from the thing, to the point where then all that we do is encourage dishonesty, because they know it's out there. But they also know that they can't talk about what's out there with you because you've tried to pretend it doesn't exist. And then you end up with a dualistic kind of relationship with people that you had hoped that you could have protected. And instead you've created a barrier of a whole area of conversation, of deep intimacy and human relationship, where you can't speak into it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So they're a great, it's a great challenge. I think the work that you're doing is obviously amazing, and but I don't know how I'd even begin. I'd just start blushing, I think, if it was me doing it. Tell me how you, just quickly, because I think we've been rabbiting well, I've been rabbiting too much, actually. It should have been more you. So how did you come then from being a student in Glasgow to then a profession of faith and walking with the Lord?
So I became a Christian. So how did I come to faith?
Yeah.
Well, this is so I became a Christian just about a year before I came to Glasgow. And I so it's a interesting story, as it all is for everybody that's come to the Lord. So I didn't grow up in the faith at all, and my younger sister became a believer when she was a couple of years younger than me, so she must have been about 14. And she'd heard somebody talk on the radio and say, how can you judge the Bible if you've never read it? And she was like, right, well, I'm going to read it, and just started to encounter God. And I can remember I walked past her bedroom one night and I was like, what are you reading? And she was like, I'm reading the Bible. And I was like, oh, how often do you read that? And she was like, oh, every night. I was like, oh my word, she's in a cult. What's happening? Yeah. So anyway, I after I finished school, which was not a good place for me at all. I finished school and I went to college, and I met a load of believers at college who really loved Jesus, and told me about this quite a lot. And I did go to a Christian concert, actually. My friend managed to get me along to this Christian concert, and I can remember going in and lots of people were like, oh, so you're a Christian? And I was like, I've been christened. I was like, yes, I'm a Christian. And then we went into the concert and everyone was like, praise the Lord. Huh? And I was like, whoa, I'm definitely not a Christian.
No.
And after that,
Can I just say that by that measure, then nor am I, because I find that very, It
was very, very alien to me. I'd never experienced anything like that at all. I'm obviously sort of trying to condense this a little bit. So I finished college after I finished my A-levels down in England. I then worked for about a year, and I worked in a hotel and then a pub, and I decided I wanted to go traveling. And so I worked ridiculous hours and saved up a load of money so I could get my visa for Australia. And so I went backpacking to Australia and New Zealand for a year. And I got to New Zealand, and it was the first time I sort of had realized that you can sort of go anywhere, but you can't take your past, you can't take your mind away from yourself. It doesn't matter where you go. And so a lot of stuff to do with my upbringing and all my eating. So my eating was really bad at this point when I arrived in New Zealand, and I was having treatment with a psychiatrist, and I terminated that and said, oh, I'm going to New Zealand to learn to surf, and see you later, and I don't care what you say. So anyway, so I got to New Zealand. I was in a really bad place, and ultimately was like, I could either end my life or I could find out about Jesus. And so I was like, I need to get a Bible. And so I went to a secondhand bookshop in New Zealand and got this little Bible. And I opened the front of it, and you know where it says all the sort of like, if you're feeling sad, go to this. And so I can't remember, it must have been something about if you're struggling with anxiety, or, you know, something along those lines. And so I turned to Philippians 4:13, that you can do all things through Christ. And at that point, I didn't even really know who Jesus was. I didn't know that I could be saved or redemption or any of those things. I just knew there was power in his name. And so, and at any point after that, if I was struggling with anything, I was like, well, if I can't get through this, Jesus can. I just knew Jesus could help me get through. So after that, I just continued traveling in Australia, and I went and worked in some country pubs for a little while, and then and I got together with this gold miner, like you do, and
he's the gold digger this time.
Yeah. Honestly, I went down to the gold mine in his big truck, so he put all the explosives in the ground. So anyway, so I went out with him for a little while, and then I moved in with his best friend in Perth in Australia, and so I was living in his flat, and then I'm trying to make this a bit shorter because it's quite long.
Going.
And so I was living with his best friend in his flat, and we had planned to go traveling together, and then I finished my shift at the pub early one night and came home to find him sleeping with my friend, and so that all fell apart. And at that point I just didn't know what to do. You know, I was on the other side of the world. I was 19 on the other side of the world on my own. And so I rang up my friend who I worked with at the pub, and she said, oh, come and stay in my flat with me. And so she let me stay in her spare room. And I can remember sitting on the bed in her spare room, and everything that my friends at college had told me about Jesus, I just knew he was real. Like there and then I knew he was real, and I knew that he would never if I lived for him, that he would never let me feel like I felt that moment, like totally in the pits. And so at that point I knew I wanted to be a Christian, but I just went off traveling again after that. And then when I came back from Australia, my sister had started going to church at this point, and she was like, oh, you should come to my church. And at that point I was like, oh no, I don't want to go to church. I'll have to go to church and lots of Christians and everything. And so, but I went along to her church, and that was it. I have never ever looked back. He's absolutely changed my life, and I am unrecognizable from the person I was at that point, physically, all those things. And there are things within my family relationships that I never ever thought could get better or could heal or look different, and they do, and that's because of him, and he'll never fail you. He absolutely is the way in the life.
So in that moment in New Zealand, he became your ideal, male person who would never betray or
I just
undermine
knew
you.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And where is the fellowship in Manchester?
So they were called the Lighthouse Christian Centre. So they were based in Chorlton, but they've moved since I've been up in Glasgow. They now meet. I think they've got a building in Salford.
Right. Great.
Yeah.
Good. And you never look back. That's wonderful.
I'm
going to wind things up now. So
we've been talking
thanks for all the time that you've given us this afternoon. I appreciate it. And tell people where they can find more information if they want to get you to visit and talk, or they're just interested in just reading more.
I mean, if people want us to come into schools that they're in, or schools their children are in, or if they'd like us to come and talk to their youth group, they can find us online. So we're at www.lovematters.org.uk. So that will probably be, we're on Facebook and Twitter as well, so feel free to drop us a message. And
that's a we, but not you. As in, Love Matters is on there, but you're not on there.
I'm not on there.
No, you're not on there.
No, not really. No,
that's okay. We've established your lack of appetite for personal engagement with these things.
Yes.
Yeah, fair dues. All right, well, I really appreciate the time you've given me, and
thank you.
God bless, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Yeah, take care.